Hi, welcome to another episode of Webcam Sessions. Last week we talked a little bit about how to find notes on the ukulele. So if you haven't checked out that video, I suggest you do. It'll come in handy with today's exercise. And what we're going to be doing today is taking a look at some chords and how we can make them sound more full and spread out the tonality of them a little bit more, especially for when we're finger picking something or we just want a fatter sound. So let's go ahead and pick up our ukuleles. And let's start by playing some chords that we probably have played a million times before. Let's start with an A chord. So the way we play an A chord is 2 on the G string with our middle finger and 1 on the C with our index. Sounds great, right? Now let's play an F chord. We're just going to take that 1 on our index finger, we're going to place it on the 1 on the E string. So we're going from the C to the E. Very cool. Now both of these chords have a problem, and what that problem is that 2 of the strings are playing the same note in what we call the same octave. So if I play that A chord again, and I play just my G string, and now just my A, you can hear they're the same thing, right? So when I'm strumming something, it's not that big of a deal because the notes sort of blend more together. But if I were wanting to finger pick it, right? If I were trying to do something like this, which essentially is just playing the G and A together, and then the E, and then the C, and repeating that. These 2 notes don't sound any different. They sound one and the same, right? So what I want to do today is I want to figure out how we can identify what notes are in the chord and how we can change one of those to be something that sounds a little bit more full, right? So first things first, we got to look at this A chord and we have to figure out what notes are in it. So using some of the exercises we worked on last week, we can start to figure that out. Now our A string is obviously playing an A note, right? It's the open A. Now our G string is playing also an A note. We established this when we talked about them being the same, and we can also hear how they sound the same. But what about the C string? Well, if we look at our C note and we go 1 fret above C, we're going to get to C sharp, right? So we've got a C sharp note here in addition to our 2 A's. And our last note there is our open E string, which will be an E note. So the notes that we have are going to be A, C sharp, and E, right? So now if I take a look at this A note, and I want to play something different than an A because they're both playing the A note, I can look for either a C sharp or an E note on the A string to play and see if it sounds different. So let's go ahead and count up to the C sharp note. So we have A sharp, B, no B sharp, we go right to C if you remember when we looked at the piano last week, C, and then C sharp. So if I play this C sharp with my A chord, it might look something like this. 2, 1, 0, 4, stretching our pinky out to the 4th fret. And now I play it. You'll notice it sounds much more open, much nicer. And the reason is even though we're doubling now a C sharp note instead of the A note, we're doubling it what's called an octave. And what that means is if you look at a piano, it's 1 note all the way across to the next. It's not going to be the same in terms of their absolute pitch. This creates a really nice sound for our A chord with minimal effort, right? Just placing our pinky here on the 4th fret of the A string. Now I say minimal effort. Obviously it took us a little while to get to this conclusion, but once we're there, it's not too difficult to just kick that pinky on. Now if I do that same picking pattern I was doing earlier, it sounds something like this. Here's without that. With it. You can hear it's just a little bit more full now because the note that I'm doubling is now doubled in an octave as opposed to being the exact same note. And I'm not saying it's better. There are a lot of situations where we want the same note and it sounds nice. And sometimes we might want to start with the same note and then add that higher pitch note later just to create a different sound, right? That's something that can be really fun to change a chord a little bit and make finger picking or strumming a little bit more interesting. For instance, now if I'm strumming the A chord, maybe I'll do one pattern with this And then I'll do one pattern with this. Pretty cool, right? So that's an example with the A chord, which is one of the two chords that we started talking about. The other one was an F chord. So let's go and play that F again. So all that we're going to do is second fret on the G string with our middle and first fret on the E with our index. Now again, we've got two doubled notes this time, being the A note again, right? But it's an F chord this time, so the other notes in the chord are different. Let's go ahead and figure out what they are. So we know we have an A note on these two. We're playing our open C string, so that's going to be a C note. And we're playing one on the E, so one step above the E is going to be F, right? So we have essentially our F, our two A's, and our C. So if I take one of these two A notes and I turn it into, say, a C, well, I can look at my A string, go A sharp, B, C. I can now play this, adding my ring finger here on the third fret of the A string, or the pinky, if that's easier. And you can hear it opens it up in the exact same way the A chord was opened up. So now if I pick this, it sounds like this. Instead of new way. Pretty cool, right? So this is the same sort of effect. It can make that chord sound a little bit more open, and that in turn can create a little bit wider of a sound, right? So again, it's not necessarily better, it's just different. And sometimes we want that richness, or we want that opportunity to play into the richness. And so I know this is pretty confusing, right? We're essentially trying to look at the three notes that are in the chord, figure out what note is doubled, and then change one of those notes to be something else to see if it helps improve the sound of the chord. Now this won't always work, and the reason is sometimes when we have a doubled note and we move one of the doubled notes, it'll double with a different note and still in the same octave. And a great example of this is a G chord. If we play our G, right, we've got our index finger here on the second fret of the C, our ring finger here on 3 of the E, and our middle finger here on 2 of the A. So that's a G chord, right? Well, the notes that are doubled here are going to be the G note. You'll notice the G string and the E string playing the exact same note, right? So we can figure out the other notes of the chord. So we got the G notes. We have a B note right here, second fret of the A string, and we have a D note right here on the second fret of the C. So if I try to change one of my G notes to, say, a B note, I could add it all the way up here on the fourth fret of the G string with my pinky coming up, right? This is a bit of a stretch, but the problem here is now I have two B notes being the exact same octave. My A string and my G string are now playing the exact same thing. So now I need to look at one of these B notes, because they're doubled, and play something different. So maybe one of these B notes becomes a D note. In that case, I can add the D here, but now I need to reposition everything. And I eventually do arrive at the same result, but it takes a little bit more work, and that's what I mean by it doesn't always work. But this G chord now, if I play my ring finger here on the fourth fret of the G string, my index finger here on the second fret of the C, my middle here on the third fret of the E, and my pinky here on the fifth fret of the A. While this isn't the G chord you might usually play, it's going to have that octave distance between notes, so it works much better for finger picking. It's just a little bit fatter of a sound than our normal G chord. So it can be kind of fun to go from one G chord to another G chord, just like our Fs or our As. Right? So try this with some of your favorite chords to see if you can make them a little bit more open. The first chord that most people learn on a ukulele is a C chord. And what's nice about a C chord, and one of the reasons why it's so popular, is it's built into this. Because the note that's doubled is a C note. It'll be here on our open C string, but it'll also be all the way here on our third fret of the A. And you can hear they're already that octave distance apart, right? So it's already that fat sound that we're sort of looking for, which is why a C string can sound really nice. Now, something I should have said at the beginning of the movie, or video, is that we're looking at this from a high G perspective at this current moment. If you're playing with a low G uke, you might have been a little bit confused as you're working through because it's already an octave difference, right? The low G ukulele gives you that opportunity to have that lower note, that lower octave. So when you're playing things like a G chord and an F chord and an A chord, they're already an octave difference. And that's pretty cool. But by still doing the same exercise and trying to find where you can put the notes in different places, you can open up the sound for the chords even more, which is really cool because a low G uke using this sort of technique can actually allow you to play some chord voicings that are more similar to a mandolin or guitar, which are these fatter sounds because the space between the notes is greater. So it's something that I really like to do to make my uke sound bigger, brighter, and I think better. But that's all subjective, right? So if you have any questions with this, feel free to leave a comment below. I know this is a pretty confusing concept, and next week we're going to be working on some more playing stuff and be back at that. We will be working on some other things involving counting notes and looking for things like that. But for now, just try to see how many different ways you can play these chords. And I will see you guys next week with another episode of Webcam Sessions. If you haven't already, please check out all of the other episodes that we've done. We're approaching episode 30, which we'll be doing something special for. And in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions down below. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week for another episode of Webcam Sessions.